In every chosen soul, when heaven interrupts the comfort of familiarity and whispers, "You cannot remain here any longer." The doors that once welcomed you begin to close, the places that once felt safe begin to feel heavy, and the silence in your spirit grows louder than the voices around you. God is not punishing you by shaking your world, He is preparing you for movement. This Sunday is not ordinary. It is a dividing line between who you were and who you are becoming. The reason you feel restless is because your destiny no longer fits inside yesterday's surroundings. And though the road ahead may seem uncertain, obedience will carry you farther than comfort ever could. When God begins to disturb the comfort of a chosen person long before He reveals the reason why, the human heart naturally clings to what is familiar. We hold tightly to places, routines, relationships, and identities because they give us the illusion of safety. Yet throughout life, God often works in a manner that seems unsettling to the natural mind. Before the blessing arrives, He first commands movement. Before enlargement comes separation. Before elevation comes departure. This is why many chosen ones feel confusion in seasons that should have felt secure. The very ground beneath them begins to shift, not because heaven has abandoned them, but because heaven is preparing them for something greater than what they currently understand. A soul cannot enter a new season while chained to an old one. God knows this even when we resist it. Sometimes the blessing is waiting in a place your comfort cannot follow. That is why God spoke to Abraham and told him to leave his country before revealing the full promise. The command came before the explanation. Faith was required before evidence appeared. And this pattern continues with every chosen one. God will often remove the stability you relied upon so you may finally lean upon Him alone. What feels like loss is sometimes divine relocation. What feels like disruption is often preparation. Many people mistakenly believe blessings always arrive with immediate peace and visible certainty. But often the first sign of a coming blessing is discomfort. Doors begin closing without explanation. Conversations lose their warmth. Opportunities dry up. A strange dissatisfaction settles inside the spirit. You try to convince yourself to stay because staying feels easier than stepping into uncertainty. Yet deep within you know something is changing. The soul can sense when God has finished a chapter, even before the eyes can see the next one beginning. C.S. Lewis once wrote in a way that revealed how God whispers through peace, but often shouts through discomfort. The chosen one begins hearing those deeper whispers during seasons of transition. Suddenly the things that once entertained you no longer satisfy you. The people who once understood you begin misreading you. Even your environment feels smaller than it once did. This is not because you have become arrogant or ungrateful. It is because growth has begun stretching your spirit beyond its former boundaries. A bird cannot remain inside the shell once life has fully formed within it. What once protected it eventually becomes the very thing that restricts it. The tragedy is that many people spend years praying for blessings while resisting the movement required to receive them. They ask God for enlargement while refusing to leave small places. They pray for purpose while clinging to environments that suffocate their calling. Yet God, in His wisdom, understands that no new wine can be poured into old wineskins without destroying both. Sometimes the greatest act of mercy God gives a chosen person is making their current season uncomfortable enough that they finally gather the courage to move. There is also loneliness in this process. Not everyone will understand why you can no longer remain where you once were. Some will accuse you of changing. Others will insist you are making mistakes. But chosen ones were never called to build their lives upon human approval. Noah looked foolish while building the ark before the rain came. Moses looked uncertain while standing before the sea before it parted. Faith often appears unreasonable to those who cannot hear what heaven is saying. And perhaps this is why God moves the chosen one before the blessing arrives, because if the blessing came first, you might trust the blessing more than the God who provided it. So He teaches obedience in hidden seasons. He teaches surrender in uncomfortable places. He teaches trust while the path is still invisible. Because the blessing itself is not the greatest miracle. The greater miracle is the transformation of the soul that learns to follow God even when nothing around it makes sense. Because there comes a painful truth every chosen one must eventually face. The place that once nurtured you can slowly become the place that limits you. What once felt like protection begins to feel like confinement. What once strengthened your spirit begins draining it. And this transition is difficult to accept because human beings become emotionally attached to the very environments that helped shape them. We honor the places where we survived our storms. We remember the people who stood beside us during weaker seasons. Yet growth creates a tension the soul cannot escape. The person you are becoming can no longer fully breathe inside the life you once needed. A child may feel safe in a small room, but a grown man cannot live there forever. In the same way, many chosen ones remain spiritually trapped because they confuse familiarity with destiny. They remain loyal to places God intended only for a season. But God never designed temporary shelters to become permanent homes. Seasons change because souls are meant to mature. The tragedy is not that seasons end, the tragedy is when people refuse to move after heaven has already withdrawn its grace from a place. There is a sorry. How that accompanies this realization. Sometimes the people around you are not evil, yet they can no longer walk where God is taking you. Some environments once healed you but are now preventing your next level of growth. And because the chosen one possesses a compassionate heart, they often remain longer than necessary out of guilt, loyalty, or fear of disappointing others. They continue watering dead ground, hoping life will return, while deep inside they know the season has already ended. This is why spiritual stagnation feels so heavy. Your body remains present, but your spirit feels trapped. You wake each morning sensing something is missing, though outwardly nothing appears wrong. The conversations become repetitive. The passion begins fading. Even your prayers start sounding tired. It is not always because you have lost faith. Sometimes it is because your spirit knows you are standing in yesterday while God is calling you toward tomorrow. C.S. Lewis understood the ache of transformation. He often wrote as though human beings are creatures standing between two worlds, one comfortable and familiar, the other terrifying yet full of eternal possibility. And many chosen ones live, precisely within that tension. God begins awakening desires within them that their current environment cannot sustain. They hunger for deeper purpose, greater truth, stronger faith, and higher calling. Yet the very place that once gave them stability now resists their growth. The old surroundings cannot understand the new spirit emerging within them, and so God allows discomfort to increase, not to destroy the chosen one, but to loosen their grip upon what they have outgrown. For if comfort remained untouched, most people would never leave. Human nature clings to predictable suffering rather than risk unfamiliar freedom. Israel longed for Egypt even after witnessing miracles because slavery had become familiar. Many chosen ones do the same. They remain emotionally chained to places God has already called them out of simply because uncertainty feels frightening. But every prison does not look like suffering. Some prisons look peaceful. Some look successful. Some even look spiritual. Yet if a place no longer challenges your obedience, sharpens your spirit, or aligns with God's direction for your life, it can quietly imprison your destiny while appearing harmless on the surface. The danger of such prisons is that they rarely announce themselves loudly. They slowly weaken vision until the chosen one forgets they were created for more. This is why God sometimes removes peace from places that once carried his comfort. Not because he is cruel, but because he loves the chosen one too deeply to let them settle beneath their calling. He allows dissatisfaction to grow until remaining becomes harder than leaving. The soul begins hearing whispers in quiet moments. You cannot stay here forever. And though fear immediately rises to argue against those whispers, something deeper within continues recognizing the voice of God. For the chosen one was never created merely to survive within safe boundaries. They were created to journey, to grow, to transform, and to follow God beyond the edges of human certainty. And the painful beauty of spiritual growth is that every new beginning eventually demands the courage to leave something behind. And this is why restlessness in the spirit should never be ignored too quickly. Many people mistake spiritual restlessness for confusion, instability, or ingratitude, when in reality, it is often heaven's gentle signal that moves us. Ent is necessary. God has a mysterious way of unsettling the chosen one whenever they begin settling into places that no longer align with their purpose. The restlessness does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it begins as a quiet dissatisfaction, a subtle ache within the soul that no amount of distraction can silence. Outwardly, life may appear normal, yet inwardly something continues whispering. There is more than this. The chosen one often struggles deeply during such seasons because they cannot fully explain what they are feeling. Nothing catastrophic may have occurred. The doors are still standing. The routine remains unchanged. The people around them may even insist that everything is fine. Yet the spirit recognizes what the eyes cannot yet see. God begins stirring the inner life long before visible change appears in the outer world. And when the spirit is being called forward, remaining still becomes emotionally exhausting. This restlessness is not ordinary ambition. It is not the shallow craving for constant excitement that the world glorifies. It is something deeper and far more sacred. It is the tension between where you are and where God is calling you to be. Om. The soul begins sensing that its current condition can no longer contain the growth taking place within. Just as a tree's roots eventually outgrow the pot that once sustained it, the chosen one begins feeling cramped inside old environments, old mindsets, and old limitations. C.S. Lewis often described humanity as carrying within itself an unexplainable longing that earthly things cannot fully satisfy. The chosen one understands this longing in a profound way. They attempt to silence it through comfort, routine, entertainment, or reasoning, yet the feeling persists. It follows them into quiet mornings and sleepless nights. Even moments of temporary happiness cannot completely remove it, because the restlessness is not coming from the world around them, it is coming from the call of God within them. And perhaps this is one of the most frightening parts of spiritual growth. God rarely reveals the full destination while he is stirring the desire to move. He simply awakens the soul enough that remaining becomes unbearable. Noah heard the warning before the flood appeared. Abraham heard the command before the land was revealed. Peter stepped onto water before understanding how he would stand. God teaches the chosen one to walk by trust, not by complete understanding. Yet human nature resists this process fiercely. We crave certainty. We want detailed explanations before obedience. We ask God to show us every step before we are willing to take the first one. But heaven does not operate according to human comfort. Faith grows in movement. Courage grows in uncertainty. And the chosen one must eventually learn that spiritual restlessness is often not an enemy to suppress, but a divine invitation to follow. Many people spend years trying to medicate spiritual restlessness instead of listening to it. They distract themselves with noise because silence forces them to confront what God is saying. They remain busy because busyness can temporarily numb conviction. But the soul cannot be deceived forever. When God is calling a chosen one into a new season, even success in the wrong place begins feeling empty. Achievements lose their sweetness. Familiar pleasures no longer satisfy. The spirit begins starving for something eternal. There is also pain in this awakening because restlessness separates you from those who are comfortable remaining where they are. Others may accuse you of overthinking, changing too much, or becoming distant. They may not understand why you can no longer settle for what once fulfilled you. But spiritual growth always creates separation between those responding to God's movement and those resisting it. Not everyone is willing to leave familiar ground. Not everyone is willing to endure uncertainty for the sake of purpose. Still, the chosen one continues hearing the whisper. It grows louder during prayer, louder during silence, louder during moments when the world temporarily pauses and the soul remembers it was made for more than survival. And eventually the restlessness becomes impossible to ignore because God never intended it merely to discomfort you. He intended it to move you. But movement always awakens another battle within the chosen one, because the moment God begins calling you forward, fear immediately begins pleading with you to remain where you are. Fear is deeply attached to familiarity. It would rather suffer inside known limitations than risk stepping into unknown territory with God. And this is why so many people remain trapped in places heaven has already outgrown for them. Not because they lack intelligence or ability, but because fear convinces them that staying still is safer than obeying the call to move. Fear speaks with a voice that sounds reasonable. It does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it whispers practical concerns, logical doubts, and endless worst-case scenarios. It reminds you of what you might lose instead of what God is trying to give. It magnifies uncertainty until the future appears dangerous and impossible. The chosen one begins asking painful questions within themselves. What if I fail? What if I leave and regret it? What if I cannot survive outside this place? What if I misunderstood God entirely? And because these questions feel human and rational, many mistake fear for wisdom. Yet throughout Scripture and throughout life, fear has often kept people standing in places where God himself no longer remained. Lot's wife looked backward because fear still tied her heart to a burning city. Israel wandered in circles because fear made slavery feel safer than freedom. The disciples trembled during storms even while Christ stood among them. Fear narrows vision until the chosen one forgets who is leading them. It causes temporary uncertainty to appease a greater than eternal purpose. C.S. Lewis understood that fear is not merely an emotion but a force that can quietly imprison the soul. He often wrote about humanity's tendency to cling to small comforts rather than surrender completely to transformation. And this is precisely what fear desires. It wants the chosen one to choose comfort over calling, safety over obedience, and routine over destiny. Fear whispers that survival is enough, but God did not create the chosen one merely to survive. He created them to walk by faith into places they could never reach through human certainty alone. The painful reality is that fear often disguises itself as loyalty. You tell yourself you are staying because you care about others, because you are being responsible, because you are waiting for the perfect time. But deep within, the spirit recognizes the truth. Some delays are not wisdom, they are fear wearing the clothing of caution. And the longer fear remains unchallenged, the stronger its chains become. Eventually, the chosen one begins building an entire life around avoiding discomfort rather than pursuing purpose. This is why God sometimes allows situations to become unbearable. Number T, because he delights in struggle, but because he understands human nature too well. If comfort remained untouched, many people would never move. They would remain spiritually asleep inside environments slowly draining their calling. So God permits pressure to increase until the pain of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving. Suddenly, the familiar no longer feels safe. The walls once trusted begin closing in. And the chosen one realizes that remaining still is costing more than movement ever could. Fear also isolates the soul. It convinces you that you are alone in your uncertainty. Yet every person God ever called had to walk through seasons where the future seemed hidden. Abraham left without knowing the destination. Moses stood trembling before Pharaoh. Esther approached the king not knowing whether she would live or die. Even Christ in Gethsemane faced the agony of surrender before the cross. Courage has never meant the absence of fear. Courage means obeying God while fear still trembles inside you. And perhaps this is what the chosen one must ultimately learn. Fear grows strongest wherever trust grows weakest. The soul cannot cling fully to fear while also resting fully in God. One voice will eventually overpower the other. Either fear will convince you to remain imprisoned within familiar boundaries, or faith will carry you beyond the limits fear tried to build around your life. Because the tragedy is not failing after obeying God. The deeper tragedy is spending your entire life standing in a place God already called you to leave. Simply because fear succeeded in making captivity feel more reasonable than freedom. And this is why every divine separation carries within it a hidden purpose the chosen one does not immediately understand. At first, separation feels painful, confusing, and even cruel. Human beings naturally mourn what they lose before they recognize what God is creating. When certain people walk away, when familiar environments collapse, when doors unexpectedly close, the chosen one often interprets these moments as abandonment. But heaven frequently removes what is comfortable in order to make room for what is necessary. No farmer curses the season when old branches are cut away, because pruning is not destruction, it is preparation for greater fruit. Yet when God begins pruning the life of a chosen one, the process rarely feels beautiful in the beginning. Relationships shift without warning. Connections weaken. Places once filled with laughter become strangely silent. The soul feels the ache of emptiness and wonders why God would allow such painful distance. But what the chosen one calls loss, God often calls alignment. There are people who can walk with you into one season of life, but cannot follow you into the next. This does not always make them evil. Sometimes their assignment was temporary from the very beginning. Yet many chosen ones suffer because they attempt to force permanent attachment to what God designed only for a chapter. They cling to expired relationships, dead routines, and fading environments long after grace has departed from them. And in doing so, they unknowingly delay their own growth. C.S. Lewis wrote with deep understanding about the painful nature of transformation. He understood that God's work within the soul often involves tearing down before building anew. The chosen one experiences this in profound ways. God begins removing distractions, unhealthy attachments, false identities, and even certain comforts that once felt essential. Not because he delights in emptiness, but because some blessings require space that your current life cannot yet provide. A room overcrowded with broken furniture has no space for something new to enter. In the same way, many chosen ones keep praying for greater purpose while holding tightly to things that no longer belong in their future. They ask God for elevation while refusing to release what keeps them spiritually grounded in old seasons. But God sees beyond temporary emotions. He knows that every new assignment demands a different version of you. And sometimes the old relationships, old habits, or old environments cannot survive the transformation necessary for your calling. The pain of separation becomes even heavier because the chosen one often loves deeply. They remember the history attached to people and places. They carry gratitude for those who once helped them survive difficult times. This makes release feel almost like betrayal. But obedience to God is not betrayal. Seasons ending is not betrayal. Growth itself requires separation. Even a seed must separate from its former form before it becomes a tree. And often, God allows separation because the chosen one has become too emotionally dependent, dented upon what was only supposed to support them temporarily. Sometimes people begin trusting relationships more than God. Sometimes they trust environments more than purpose. Sometimes they remain loyal to familiarity while slowly abandoning their destiny. So heaven intervenes, not always gently, but always intentionally. There is also a spiritual reality many fail to recognize. Some separations are acts of protection. God can see conversations you have not heard yet, betrayals you do not yet perceive, and limitations that would eventually suffocate your growth. The chosen one may cry over a closed door today, unaware that the same door would have led them into years of delay tomorrow. But because human vision is limited, we grieve what heaven prevented. And still, during separation, loneliness becomes one of the greatest tests. The chosen one begins walking through unfamiliar silence. People who once surrounded them disappear. Support systems weaken. Even their old identity begins fading away. It feels as though everything stable is being stripped from their hands. But this is often where God does his deepest work. For when distractions leave, the soul finally becomes quiet to hear him clearly. The chosen one slowly begins realizing that divine separation was never meant to destroy them. It was creating room. Room for greater wisdom. Room for deeper faith. Room for healthier connections. Room for purpose that could not coexist with the weight of old attachments. Because God understands something the human heart struggles to accept. You cannot carry yesterday's life into tomorrow's calling and still expect to walk freely into your destiny. And this is why the chosen one must eventually learn to trust God even when the path ahead remains hidden from human understanding. Trust is easy when the road is clear, the answers are visible, and the outcome appears secure. But real faith begins where certainty ends. God rarely reveals the entire journey at once because if he did, many souls would depend more upon the map than upon him. So instead, he gives light for one step at a time, teaching the chosen one to walk forward without demanding complete explanation. This is one of the hardest lessons for the human heart. We crave control because control gives the illusion of safety. We want guarantees before obedience, evidence before surrender, dare and visible proof before movement. Yet heaven operates differently. God asks the chosen one to trust his character even when his plan cannot yet be fully seen. And this often creates deep internal struggle because the soul stands between two voices, one demanding certainty and the other calling for faith. C.S. Lewis understood this tension profoundly. He wrote as though faith was not the absence of questions, but the decision to continue trusting even while questions remain unanswered. The chosen one experiences this battle constantly. They pray for direction, but instead of receiving detailed instructions, they receive only enough strength to take the next step. And sometimes that next step feels terrifying because the future appears covered in fog. But God has never required his people to see the entire staircase before climbing. Noah built before rain appeared. Abraham walked before the destination was revealed. Joseph endured betrayal and prison long before understanding why God allowed such suffering. Even the disciples followed Christ without fully comprehending where the journey would eventually lead. Throughout history, God has always asked his chosen ones to move in, trust before they could move in understanding. The difficulty is that uncertainty exposes every hidden fear within the soul. When the path is unclear, insecurity rises. Doubt whispers louder. Old wounds resurface. The chosen one begins questioning their ability, their worth, and even whether they truly heard God correctly. There are nights when obedience feels lonely because no visible evidence yet confirms the decision. The world around them may even mock their faith, insisting they are foolish for stepping away from comfort without guaranteed results. Yet trust is not built in seasons where everything makes sense. Trust is forged precisely in moments when the chosen one must continue walking despite incomplete understanding. A child learns trust not because they know where the parent is leading, but because they know the parent's heart. In the same way, God desires the chosen one to know him deeply enough that they can continue forward even while the destination remains hidden. And often, the hiddenness itself is an act of mercy. If God revealed every future battle, every delay, every sacrifice, and every transformation required, many people would become overwhelmed before beginning. So he unfolds destiny gradually. He strengthens the soul little by little. He reveals purpose season by season. Not to torment the chosen one, but to protect them from burdens they are not yet prepared to carry. There is also danger in demanding constant visibility from God. When people refuse to move without complete understanding, they unknowingly place human logic above divine wisdom. But human vision is painfully limited. We judge situations by immediate comfort, temporary emotion, and visible appearance. God sees eternity. He sees consequences hidden far beyond the present moment. He sees doors that must close, people who must leave, and paths that must unfold in ways the human mind cannot yet comprehend. The chosen one must therefore learn a deeper kind of surrender, not passive resignation, but active trust. A trust that says, even when I cannot see clearly, I will continue following. A trust that survives silence. A trust that remains steady during delay. A trust that believes God is still guiding even when the road appears uncertain. And strangely, it is often during these uncertain seasons that the chosen one discovers the greatest intimacy with God. When human security disappears, the soul finally learns dependence. Prayer becomes deeper. Discernment becomes sharper. Faith becomes less about emotion and more about conviction. The chosen one begins understanding that God was never merely leading them toward a destination, he was shaping their character throughout the journey itself. Because the ultimate goal was never simply arriving at a blessing. The deeper purpose was becoming the kind of soul capable of carrying that blessing without losing dependence upon the one who provided it. And perhaps this is why this Sunday marks the beginning of a season the chosen one can no longer avoid. There are moments in life when God permits delay, allowing the soul time to mature quietly beneath the surface. But there also comes a moment when heaven declares that preparation has lasted long enough. The season of hesitation ends. The excuses lose their power. The inner stirring becomes impossible to silence. And the chosen one realizes they are standing at the edge of a crossing that can no longer be postponed. This is not merely another ordinary turning point. It is the kind of spiritual moment that divides life into before and after. Many people experience years where nothing seems to change outwardly, while inwardly God is slowly preparing them for one decisive shift. Like water heating quietly before it finally boils, the soul undergoes hidden transformation long before visible movement occurs. And then suddenly, what once felt impossible becomes unavoidable. The chosen one understands with painful clarity that remaining where they are would now require betraying what God has placed within them. There is something deeply frightening about irreversible seasons. Human nature loves the illusion that there will always be more time, another opportunity, another chance to obey later. But certain moments carry a divine urgency. Not because God is impatient, but because destiny itself moves according to seasons. A door meant for one chapter may not remain open forever, and the chosen one begins sensing that this is no longer a season for endless contemplation. It is a season for movement. C.S. Lewis often wrote as though eternity quietly pressed itself against ordinary moments. He understood that life's greatest transformations rarely announce themselves with dramatic signs. Instead, they arrive through inward conviction, a deep knowing that the soul cannot return to sleep after awakening to truth. And this is precisely what happens when God calls the chosen one into a new season. Something irreversible awakens within them. The old life no longer fits. Old conversations feel empty. Old fears lose some of their authority. Even though uncertainty still exists, a deeper certainty begins forming beneath it. The chosen one may still tremble while stepping forward. Courage does not remove human emotion. There will still be moments of doubt, loneliness, and questioning. There will still be nights where the future appears unclear. Yet beneath all of this, the spirit recognizes something undeniable. God is moving. And when God begins moving powerfully within a life, resistance becomes exhausting. The soul grows tired of fighting the very transformation it secretly knows is necessary. This is why many chosen ones suddenly feel disconnected from their previous identity during transitional seasons. They are no longer who they once were, yet they have not fully become who they are meant to be. It is an uncomfortable space standing between endings and beginnings, but this space is holy. It is where dependence deepens. It is where hidden strength forms. It is where the chosen one learns that faith is not merely believing God exists, but believing he is worthy of obedience, even when the future remains unseen. And perhaps the greatest challenge of all is accepting that some things cannot accompany you into the next season. Certain habits, relationships, fears, and mindsets must remain behind. God never calls the chosen one forward while allowing them to carry every weight from the past. Transformation demands surrender. The soul must travel lighter if it is to move where heaven is leading. Still, the beauty of divine calling is this: God never commands movement without also preparing provision along the way. The Red Sea parted only after Israel stepped forward. Manna appeared only after the wilderness journey began. Peter discovered he could walk upon water only after leaving the safety of the boat. God's provision often waits on the other side of obedience. But the chosen one cannot experience what God has prepared while refusing to leave what God has already finished. And so this Sunday becomes more than a date upon a calendar. It becomes a spiritual line in the sand. A moment where the chosen one must decide whether they will continue clinging to familiar limitations or finally trust the voice of God, calling them beyond what they have always known. Because some seasons are optional, but others arrive with divine certainty. And when such a season begins, the soul eventually realizes that the greatest danger is no longer moving forward into uncertainty. The greatest danger is remaining still after God has already said move.